Okay. All right. Well done, guys. It's Friday! Okay, any questions from Wednesday? Or yesterday, I guess. Before we start chapter 13.
I don't know.
Hello. No questions? Okie dokie. All right. Pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons why I skip all the way to this chapter to start. The first is I think that typically body composition is an interesting subject for most HPE students. So I like to start off with something that will grab your attention and that you'll enjoy. And the second reason is that in relation to the physical activity portfolio, some of you may choose to set goals around body composition. And so to help you set appropriate goals, like we discussed yesterday, I like to use this chapter as the intro to the semester. Okay, so if you have any questions as we're going along, jump in, turn your mic on, yell at me. Okay, and let's see how we go. So typically what I do is use the first slide for the learning objectives that are at the front of the chapter, and then if there are objectives for the chapter that I know we're not going to cover or I don't want you to spend time studying, I'll take those off the list. So it's always a good idea just to match the list at the beginning of the PowerPoint to the list at the chapter. Okay, just to see. I don't think on this chapter I cut anything out, but I do on some, so it's worth checking so you don't waste time studying something that won't come up. Okay, so start off with some verbiage. We are going to use a very simple model of body composition, just a two-factor model. So we're looking at fat versus non-fat tissue or fat-free tissue. And then also the ratio of fat to the total body mass. So terms you'll often hear that we measure are fat mass, so how much fat is there in the entire body, fat-free mass, so everything else, skin, bones, organs, muscles, okay, everything else. And then we use percentage body fat, often, bless you, often as a measure that we use, like that's my goal, I want to be 3% lower body fat or something like that. Okay. So, as I said, this is a relatively simple division. There are models that actually will pull out in the non-fat tissue. They'll say, okay, muscle mass is this or bone mass is this. but to measure the non-fat tissue by particular type takes very sophisticated equipment that we don't have, and I suspect most of you are not going to ever get your hands on. So I just like to stick with the very applied, easy version, okay? So this figure in the book is a nice indication of why body composition is an important concept to understand. So two people that have the exact same total body mass, so if we stood them on a scale they would weigh the same, can have completely different body compositions. So the gentleman on the left, both gentlemen weigh 90 kilos. The chap on the left, when you do an underwater weighing, is at 4 kilos. So if you put that into clever computer program, it will tell you that he has 23% fat mass, right? And that means his fat-free mass is 77% of his total mass, okay? Now, the chap on the right also weighs 90 kilos, but his fat mass is 12%, and his fat-free mass is therefore 88%. So you can see that the gentleman on the right is much leaner, has a lot more probably bone density and a lot more muscle mass. Okay? So it's an important idea because we tend to get hung up on standing on the scale, right? But standing on the scale doesn't tell you anything except what you weigh, right? And what you weigh is much more sophisticated than just your mass, right? We need to know how much fat mass we have. You know, we need to make sure that our fat-free mass is as high as it can be. We want plenty of muscle mass, we want a lot of bone density, so that we've got nice, strong, healthy bones as we get older, and we don't end up as a little old grandma who breaks her hip and has to have a hip replacement and, you know, then can't move around very well and what have you, all right? So body composition is much more important than weight, all right? I would not use a scale. There's one instance when, during the semester when I'll say, okay, now is the time to use a scale. Other than that, I wouldn't use one with your athletes or your clients or your PE students, all right? Because the weight is not the issue. The issue is the composition, okay? So we're at a really concerning time right now with regards to health status of people. In particular, when we look at obesity and overweight in certain countries, America, the UK are in big trouble, America in particular. So we've literally reached an epidemic of obesity. And in adults, and we'll talk about the problems with BMI over the course of the semester. BMI has a lot of issues built in, but if you have a BMI of 25 to 29.9, that's considered overweight as an adult, not as a child. So that's 18 and up. And if your BMI is 30 or above, then you're considered obese, all right? When we do BMI measures in lab, those of you that are particularly strength athletes may well end up in the obese category. So clearly BMI in and of itself isn't a good measure taken on its own, right? In the US, we've got a lot, so over 250,000 people die from disease that is related to being obese. About 70% of adults are overweight or obese, and we're coming up on 40% of adults are obese. So 30% are overweight. So now we've got a balance shift between those who are overweight and those who are obese. Now we've got, of our overweight obese category, more people are obese than overweight. That's a problem, right? It's a problem. And it's getting worse, not better. With everything we know, it's getting worse. So the frustrating thing when you look at this problem is so many people are trying to lose weight, right? So you'll find out I'm not a big fan of diets. And one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of diets is they don't work, right? Because if they worked, we wouldn't be getting fatter, we'd be getting thinner as a population, right? Go on. Did you have a question? Okay. And remember that I said to you guys, you're not normal, right? We as a group are not normal, so you can't judge some of what I'm saying by us, right? Because we're in a very small percentage of the population, okay? So, here are some disturbing maps. So, data's been collected since a bit before 1995, and it was collected every 5 years originally, and then when we got to 2011, they changed the reporting method. So, it's difficult to compare data directly from 2011 onwards to the earlier stuff, but still the problem's getting worse. So you can see in 2000 there was only one state, Colorado, left that had a 10 to 14% obesity rate. The rest of the country, so from 1995 to 2000, things took a dramatic turn for the worse. And then it just kept getting worse. And so 2005, now we have a couple of states, 1, 2, 3 states that are reporting over 30% obesity. By 2010, you can see the purple is worse. And then we get to 2011 and the new reporting. And so at that point in 2011, they changed the groupings. So they had a dark kind of reddy orange that was going to be less than 20%, but no one made that in 2011. And so the lowest category is 20 to 25%. All right. So you've got a couple of states in the Northeast, California, what's next to that? Nebraska. Don't know what that is, and Colorado. What's in between Nebraska and Colorado? I don't know, whatever that is. And then this one up here must be northern Montana, maybe? I'm not sure. I don't know American geography very well. So the hope was that we knew enough by 2011 that the picture would get better. But between 2011 and 2018, the picture deteriorated badly except for Colorado, and that may be, I'm not sure what that is. Rhode Island? No, Rhode Island isn't actually that far away from the, I don't know, whatever that is. Right, so we've got an ongoing problem that's getting worse, not better. Doesn't seem to matter how much we learn about physical activity, or how to get children engaged, or healthy eating habits. It's not getting through to the population, right? So back in 2000, when we had this dramatic change from 1995 data, the CDC and the NIH and other governing bodies said, we've got to do something. And so the government put out a set of guidelines for the states that was called 2010, Healthy People 2010. So we got to 2010, and the picture was way, way worse than it was in 2000. So the whole media hype, the whole knowledge output and the guidelines did not change, and in fact things got worse. So no state met the goals for Healthy People 2010. So then they created Healthy People 2020. And we don't have the data, since we're just into 2021, so we don't have the data on Healthy People 2020, but I would feel relatively comfortable betting we didn't make much progress, okay? Right now, the estimate is that 1 in 8 preschoolers across the country is obese. Between 17 and 17.5% of 6 to 19-year-olds are obese. The New Mexico data is worse than that. The New Mexico data is showing around 30% of 6 and 8-year-olds are obese. So this problem not only is getting worse when we look at the adults, it's now filtering down to the children. And that's a huge problem because, most of you might not know what it's like to be overweight, right? But it makes moving very difficult and uncomfortable. So if we've got children who are overweight and obese, trying to get them engaged in physical activity and teaching them motor skill patterns and teaching them healthy habits for their lifelong movement is going to be very difficult because they're not going to be interested in moving very much. Right? So, it's really concerning because of the number of diseases that are associated with particularly obesity. All right, so you can see the list there. It's pretty bad. Cardiovascular disease and hypertension, type 2 diabetes. Some people who are obese have trouble sleeping healthily because they get sleep apnea, and what happens with sleep apnea is your brain switches off your breathing pattern and you stop breathing. And so for some of these people, they actually have to have an alarm system that wakes them up to make them start breathing again, right? So there's all kinds of problems surrounding obesity. And when you're not obese or overweight and you're in good shape and you enjoy moving and you eat relatively healthily and you make the effort to move pretty much every day, it's very difficult to understand how people can allow themselves to become obese, all right? It's very tempting to be judgmental about those people and say, oh, well, they're just lazy, or they're stupid, or they're greedy, or, right? But being obese is highly complicated, all right? There's a lot more problems than the baseline factor of these people eat more calories than they expend, all right? That's the base, and that's the reality for most. But the more that the research is looking at this population, the more we're finding out that's not just the simple whole picture, right? That there isn't just that simple answer. There's some pretty significant other problems going on for many of this population. So a lot of them have genetic issues with certain hormone productions. In particular, leptin is a hormone that tells you that your fat stores are full, you know, and you shouldn't be eating as much, and there are other hormones that play a role that tell you, oh, you're full up now, you know, so you know that if you eat a big meal that you get that kind of full up feeling. Well, some people who are obese don't get that feeling. They never feel full up, right? And so there isn't that trigger to stop them eating more calories. Okay? And they then can also have problems with appetite control, so areas of the brain that are connected with appetite control don't work effectively because they're not getting this full up feeling. And so there's some real physiological problems that can also play a role. And, you know, as I said, once you're that overweight, then being physically active becomes difficult. You've got to be really, really motivated. So, you know, as I said, most of you probably have not experienced that. Next time you go to the supermarket, wear your mask, go to the vegetables, pick up the biggest bag of potatoes you can pick up, and carry it with you all the way around Walmart, right? And that isn't even close to the additional weight that some of these people have to manage, all right? And you'll see how uncomfortable and difficult it becomes, okay? So, you know, yes, we have to do something about educating on physical activity and what they're eating, but the research is not very positive about that, unfortunately. So, let me see, what's the next slide? Oh, yeah, McDoo-doos. At least McDoo-doos have calorie counts now, which is better than they used to have. But be aware that, you know, if you buy like a supersized meal, right, and that gives you a big soda and a large fry and a big hamburger or 2 hamburgers, that is nearly 2,000 calories, right? For most people, 2,000 calories is all they need for an entire day, if they're active during the day. Like for me, right, 2,000 is about where I'm at now. It's dropping as I get older, but if I eat about 2,000 and I maintain my physical activity level, then my weight is dead stable, right? So in one meal, it's possible to eat enough calories for almost an entire day. Now, if you're a Tour de France cyclist, different kettle of fish, because they burn about 10,000 calories a day. right? So they can eat their McDoo-Doo's supersized meal, okay? So picture changed a little bit in 2013. Before 2013, obesity was considered a condition, and so that didn't mitigate any health workers to intervene unless they were personally motivated to do so, right? But in 2013, the AMA changed the classification to a disease, which is an interesting change in the law, because now if it's a disease, healthcare workers like the GPs and the doctors and the nurse practitioners who are at the health clinics are now required to address it and provide help, right? So the research has not, in my view, been too helpful overall. That what the research says that the combination diet alone doesn't work. Diet and exercise work better, but cannot be maintained long term. So what they find with an obese population is that very few people will persist in a lifestyle change that involves diet and exercise, okay? My problem with the research at the moment, and I don't read enough in this area because this is not my research area, but my problem is that the diets they were putting these people on were very, very low calorie. And so who would keep that up, you know? I mean, I think that we have to have a different approach where we balance things a little more sensibly. I mean, you can't ask someone who's been eating 3,500, 4,000 calories a day to suddenly subsist on 1,000 calories a day or less, right? I mean, that's just, no one would do it. I wouldn't eat 1,000 calories a day and stick at it for more than a day, right? So, you know, we need more work. We need to do more research on what works and how do we keep this population motivated to stay persistent with the program. There is bariatric weight loss surgery, so if you're morbidly obese, surgeons will do things like, you know, tie your stomach. They'll put bands on either end of the stomach and literally shrink the size of the balloon that can take food. The problem with those, I mean, I think I only actually know one person that did that, and it was great for a few years, and then they just started putting on weight again, right? Because surgery isn't a lifestyle change. It has to be a lifestyle change. It's the only way, right? Now that we're getting a better understanding of the hormone imbalance, or hormones that aren't working, or hormones that aren't being produced properly, that are impacting the problem, there's a lot of work going on to try to develop pharmacological drugs that would either kickstart the hormone production or replace the hormone production. Seems as though those work a little bit better over time at the moment, but I'm a bit cynical because it's like a quick fix almost, right? It's way easier to take a tablet than to make yourself change your life. Okay? And so I'm quite cynical when it comes to that. Let me see if yeah.
I just have one question right quick, Dr. Wall.
Sure. Is that Kayla?
Yes.
Hi, Kayla.
Okay, so is there ever been a circumstance where someone could be too big to have bariatric surgery?
Oh gosh.
Like, is that a thing? I just didn't know. I was kind of wondering if there was like a weight limit you had to meet to have that kind of a surgery.
It wouldn't, I don't know the answer to that, Kayla, but it would not surprise me because, you know, when you look at some of these people who are 650 pounds, 700 pounds, you know, or bigger, putting them under anesthetic for that surgery would be highly risky. So yeah, I could see that there would be a situation where the person is too large to make surgery safe. Yeah. But I don't personally know, it's not something I've ever read, but I think it's a definite possibility. Especially given the sleep apnea type problems, you know, and yes, when you're in surgery, someone's monitoring your breathing and making sure that you're breathing. But if you stop breathing, they then have to get you breathing again, you know, and that's not a good situation to be in when you're cut open, I would think. So, but yeah, interesting question. Okay, I want to draw something that I usually draw on the board. It's a lot easier to draw it on the board, but I'll give it a go. Okay. All right. So, when you're reading this chapter, they'll talk about the idea of energy balance, okay? And that's the first point on one of those lists there was that, you know, when you look at this population, they typically eat more calories than they expend through moving or keeping themselves warm, because here's the other problem. People who have that much subcutaneous fat are boiling hot all the time. Right? You don't see them walking around in polo neck jumpers and down jackets very often, right? They're the people in the supermarket that have skimpy little t-shirts and shorts on when it's 32 degrees outside, because all that subcutaneous fat works like a wrapped around duvet. Okay? So you don't even have to use extra energy to keep yourself warm. So, you know, the difficulties get bigger and bigger. Anyway, the energy balance can be very nicely shown using a seesaw, all right? So we have I'll do the best, I'm hopeless at drawing on this whiteboard. We've got the seesaw, right? And on one side we have our activity. Okay? And on the other side, we have the calories that we're eating. All right? So the deal here is, if I expend the same amount of calories, energy, as I put into my body, then my weight stays stable. Right? If I put more calories in, right, and then I expend, I put on weight, and if I expend more calories than I put in, I lose weight. Right? simple idea. It's the basis of maintaining or changing body composition. But as I've tried to say, once you're in that obese category, it's a little more complicated than just that. Now, energy expenditure on this side of the seesaw is made up of a couple of different factors, right? The number one thing we spend energy on is maintaining our body, metabolic rate, all right? So you'll see the terms basal metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate. They are slightly different, but measurement-wise, it's easier to measure resting metabolic rate, because to measure basal metabolic rate correctly, the person has to come and sleep overnight in the lab, and you have to measure them while they're sleeping and before they get up in the morning, right? So an applied version of that is resting metabolic rate, where you have the person lie down for, I don't know, half an hour or whatever they do, and then they measure metabolic rate with equipment, all right? So that's by far and away the biggest use of energy in our body. We also have activity that uses energy, calories, and that can be anything from brushing your teeth to going for a run, right? Anytime you are moving anything, you're using energy to do that, all right? The third element of the energy expenditure side of the seesaw is called TEM, and it's the thermic effect of a meal. So if you pay attention to it, the next time you have a big meal, like we're past Christmas and Thanksgiving now, but the next time you have a big meal, maybe Easter, right? Think about you eat, and you feel a little bit chilly when you sit down to eat, you turn the heat up in the house, you eat this big meal, and about 20 minutes or so later, everybody's going, whew, it's hot in here, let's turn the heat down, right? Because digesting food takes a lot of energy, and when we break food down, we also release a lot of heat, right? So those are the three elements on this side. And then pretty much anything except water, some forms of lettuce, I guess some forms of cucumber, anything that's real. But pretty much everything has calories of something, right? Even if they're very, very low, goes in this side, right? So if I balance it, I maintain my weight. If I tip it so that my calories are heavier and my expended calories are lighter, I put on weight. Typically, that's going to be fatness, right? If I go the other way and I put more work into my physical activity, then I can increase my calorie expenditure and decrease, I can decrease calorie intake if I want to. Right? Does that make sense? So if I want to lose 2 pounds a week of fat, right? We don't want to lose muscle and bone mass. Alright, so when we say we want to lose weight, we don't really mean weight, we mean fat mass, mostly. Unless I'm a huge strength athlete who retires and they want to drop some muscle mass. Most of us are trying to put on a little bit of muscle and lose some fat, right? So, to lose 2 pounds of fat a week, I have to tip my seesaw by 1,000 calories a day, right? So I've got an option then. frustrated with the research a little bit, and maybe it's just I haven't read enough of the research, perhaps I'm not digging deep enough. But, so, if I want to lose 2 pounds, right, I could, let's change the colour, I could add 1,000 calories worth of exercise. Right? That's option 1. Well, that might be okay for people who are already in shape, but it's not a very good plan for someone who's sedentary or low active. So option 2 then is I can decrease, my calorie intake by 1,000 calories. That's a huge change in diet, and people are very resistant to changing the diet. So that probably won't work either, right? But there's a third option here, an easy third option with multiple bits to it, right? The simple version is I can increase my calorie expenditure by 500, and I can decrease my calorie intake by 500. And then I've upset my teeter-totter, my seesaw, by my 1,000 calories, and I'll lose about 2 pounds of fat that week. Right? So this seems to me to be the best approach. Right? You can't ask someone who is sedentary to suddenly become highly active. No wonder they don't stick to it, right? You can't ask someone who likes eating to totally change their eating and cut it in half or cut it into a third or however much they were eating beforehand. They're not going to stick to it. But if I ask you to do just a little bit more movement every day and eat just a little bit less every day, maybe that would be attainable, right? I don't know. But we have to do something because it's just getting worse, right? Particularly for the children. I am nowhere near where I should be. I'm talking too much again, guys. You have to throw something at me. That's why I need you here in the classroom, so you can throw something at me and make me shut up. All right, where are we? Okay. So then to complicate matters even more, it depends what kind and where you lay your fat down. All right? So people who put their fat down around their trunk here, that's called central android or visceral obesity. So that means that you've got lots of fat laid down around your heart, around your liver, around your stomach, right? It's all inside around your organs. And that tends to make us apple-shaped, right? We carry all our weight here. So we look like a nice round rosy apple. It's typically more male, but that doesn't mean that you don't see females that exhibit that picture. So my sister is a classic apple, long skinny legs, long skinny arms, beautiful cheekbones, and from here to here, she's like this, right? It's unusual for the female, but you do see it, right? That visceral obesity is much more closely linked to coronary artery disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and stroke attacks. And there's something about the way it releases fat and the interaction with insulin that makes it more dangerous. And that's as much as I know, right? I don't know the actual mechanisms. If you have more female type fat deposits, here, right, here, that's called peripheral gynoid or subcutaneous obesity, and it tends to lend itself to a more pear-shaped outline because it's very heavy around here. Okay? So the location of the body fat is linked to the types of health problems you might develop as you get older, right? So another measure that you'll often see talked about is waist to hip ratio. And so for men, if their waist to hip ratio, so if I measure with a tape measure hips and I measure waist, if that ratio is greater than 0.95, that increases their cardiovascular disease risk and their chance of sudden death with a heart attack or a stroke. For women, it's 0.8, right? So that's another measure you can use. And actually, if you have to use BMI, if you combine BMI and waist to hip ratio, that gives you a much more better feel for whether that BMI category is true or not, right? Because if you're an athlete and you've got lots of muscle mass and you come out in the low obese category and then you do a waist-hip ratio, you're not going to be in the risk category, right? Because your waists are tight and narrow and they're not going to be bigger than your hips, right? That's the key, when your waist gets bigger than your hips. Right? So, those of you that have taken motor behavior already might remember this idea, but generally, as adults, we put on fat mass via hypertrophy, right? So we have all our balloon fat cells and we add more stored fat to those cells, right? But as a fetus and as a child and during puberty, we put on fat via hyperplasia, which is we actually add additional fat cells. Okay? What happens in the obese population is that they have laid down, right, their original kind of normal level of fat storage has been filled up, and now they've got all this extra calories that need storing, and it drives the body to lay down additional fat cells, which is not a typical picture when you look at the evolution of a human. Right? So when we look at a normal person, normal, whatever that means, right? They have apparently, about 25 billion adipocytes, fat cells. Okay, 25 billion sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And if you're extremely obese, that number can go up as high as 80 billion fat cells. So this is a problem because, again, if you took motor behavior already, you might remember this, but fat cells don't go away once they're laid down, right? You can't get rid of them. You can only empty them out, but the actual cell, the storage unit, the little, like if you buy those, like a little Ziploc bag, right? The Ziploc bag's still sitting there waiting to get filled up again. I can empty the Ziploc bag out, but the Ziploc bag doesn't go away. 80 billion. So that's a problem, right? Because that means if hyperplastic obesity cells don't go away, they're just sitting there. This is why we get this seesawing. It's why when you look at the research, people who start losing weight on these plans start putting weight back on again and don't stick to the plan, and the weight comes back because the storage space is already sitting there waiting for it. Bless you! Okay, I'm quite far behind where I should have got to today. Oops, I definitely talked too much. Okay, we will pick up then. I'm going to have to go much faster on Monday. We'll pick up on that slide on Monday. What I would like you to look at, the bit that I'm not going to have time to cover now, jump into chapter 13 and look at the paragraph that is talking about the obesity paradox. All right? It's very interesting because what they're saying is, well, there's a couple of different versions of it, but one version is if you're obese but you can manage to do enough cardiovascular work to have reasonable cardiovascular health, you are more likely not to develop coronary artery disease than someone who is a normal weight who's a slug. So, I highly recommend that you jump into the chapter and read that paragraph on the obesity paradox because it's fascinating. And on that note, have a lovely weekend. Sorry I talked so much. It's just too much stuff to tell you. And I'll see you on Monday, okay?
Have a good weekend.
And you.